How's it going, Giants fans? Welcome back to Fireside Giants with your boys, Alex and Anthony. Today, we're looking at the 4 top weaknesses on this Giants team after Week 14's demolition against the Philadelphia Eagles. Obviously, still lots of football left to some teams. You know, you just cough it up as a bad game. Seems like Brian Dable and Julian Love and some of the leaders on this team are kind of indicating that, you know what, they just kind of kicked our butts and we got to bounce back and have a better performance. I don't think that if you put the Giants up every single week, especially if we're healthy, that we see that level of beat down. You know what I mean? I think probably after, a day after, it seemed like an anomaly. I don't think that happens all the time. I think the Giants had a lot of weaknesses, a lot of practice squad players. What are they supposed to do? You're just kind of going up against a healthier roster. And unfortunately, the Giants caught the short end of the stick on that one. But I'll tell you what, this team does have lots of weaknesses. There are going to be a lot of things to address come the offseason. But right now, I think it's fair to look at where those biggest weaknesses lie. We're going to exclude quarterback for this episode because I think that's probably deserving of its own episode entirely, a conversation we should have another day. I also know that a lot of people in the comment section are immediately going right into the comments right now and listing quarterback needs to go. And I get it. I understand. We appreciate the responses, appreciate the opinions and thoughts. But we just want to focus on the other position groups today because I think those are the more clear-cut situations, whereas quarterback, we just don't know. I know that some people think they should stay, some people think he should go, but Daniel Jones, the coaching staff is really, that's what it comes down to, what they think. We obviously know they need cornerback help, they need linebacker help, they need receiver help, they need offensive line help. Rank those for you guys, and obviously would love to hear your thoughts on those specific positions as well and kind of the personnel we have there. But Anthony, before we dive into this, how you feeling after kind of the blowout loss yesterday, kind of me pushing it into the past at this point in time and looking forward toward a brighter future?
Yeah, looking forward toward a brighter future, but more specifically, looking forward to this upcoming Sunday versus Washington. This is a crucial game for the New York Giants. Of course, really hot start to the season, starting to slow down here. Very disappointing and embarrassing loss yesterday to Philadelphia. I thought the Giants would at least keep it close, keep it competitive. That didn't happen. Horrible blowout. That's not what you want to see. But going into this game against Washington, this is a chance for the Giants to right the ship and get back on track. They win this game, they increase their chances of making the playoffs exponentially. And I know that's what Brian Dable is trying to do, be the coach who steps in and instantly makes the playoffs. That's what you want to see. However, long term, is this a sustainable roster to win games with? Absolutely not. And that's what we're seeing. That's why the Giants are struggling to win games right now. They have a lot of holes and a lot of weaknesses all over this roster, and that was really uncovered and displayed on the fullest extent yesterday versus Philadelphia. So it's going to be interesting to take a look at some of these positions. I know you don't want to talk about the quarterback position. That's a real hot topic right now, especially as we get towards the final weeks of the season. Once we reach that offseason, that Daniel Jones debate is going to be scorching hot. Everyone is going to want to give their hot takes and opinions about Daniel Jones and what the Giants should do at quarterback. But right now, Daniel Jones is the starting quarterback of the New York Giants. He has won them quite a few games. He has a bunch of game-winning drives this season, and we just need to hope and pray that the Giants can go out there, get that win against Washington. Daniel Jones can lead them to that victory, and maybe they can string together a few more solid performances, get some wins, sneak into the playoffs for the first time since 2016. Now, I understand that the Giants don't really look like a playoff team right now. They're not going to get a high draft pick if they make the playoffs. I don't care. It's been 6 years. I need to see the New York Giants play some football in the month of January and hopefully in the month of February. It has been far, far too long. I'm a huge New York Giants fan, so that's the only thing that I want to see at the end of the day. I want to see the Giants make the playoffs, and they can't do that until they fix this roster up a little bit and start winning some of these football games.
Yep, absolutely. So let's start out with it. Kind of the biggest weakness, in my opinion, we're going to rank the top 4 weaknesses in this episode. Number 1, in my opinion, you guys may disagree, I think it's the offensive line, because I think that the interior offensive line ultimately determines the success of the quarterback. It ultimately determines the success of the receivers, and it ultimately determines the success of the running game. Right now, passing game, virtually non-existent. Saquon Barkley hasn't rushed for over 63 yards in 4 weeks now. So you're seeing what is a malnourished offense and what an offensive line can do if they're not performing well. Now, that's not to say just the interior line played poorly. Andrew Thomas gave up a sack like on the first play of the game, and then Evan Neal gave up a sack and 8 total pressure. So that's not to say that the offensive tackles didn't struggle as well against a really, really potent Eagles defensive line. And, give them credit. They had a really good game. But you're looking at the interior there. They've had pretty much consecutive bad games for the past couple of weeks. Nick Gates got his butt kicked against Washington, came out a better game against the Eagles, still wasn't great. Nobody really played good on the offensive line. Andrew Thomas locked it down after that initial sack, but otherwise it wasn't that bad. So I think that Nick Gates, much better as a center. If there's any place that he should be in the future, it should be at center. If he's not starting, he should at least be a backup there. Left guard, Ben Bredesen, he started out the season good, but he's not a good player. He's probably average at best. And then right guard, Mark Lewinsky has really struggled. I mean, against Eagles, his grades weren't that. I didn't give up that much pressure, but I just don't trust him either. He's really been inconsistent for us, despite signing that 3-year, $18 million deal. And John Feliciano, I mean, that he's got to go. I mean, the guy, he's tough, and he's tough as nails, whatever. He's a tough guy. He's got the mentality, like kind of the hog molly mentality, as Dave Gettleman will call it. I never want to use that word again. Freaking nightmares. But I'll tell you this right now, that interior line cannot stay the same. You cannot go into next season with those guys as your everyday players. Now, Josh Ezeudu, I do believe in him. I think that he is a good young player that has promise. He's a little bit injured right now, I believe. So, doesn't get the necessary reps that we'd like for him to be experiencing right now. But ultimately, he has a long way to go. He's a third-round pick. Obviously, run blocking a little bit more prominent to his game. Pass blocking has struggled. His feet, his hands, not totally connected just yet. I'd love to continue giving him opportunities and reps, but he shouldn't be starting. This year actually would be the perfect time. Right now would be the perfect time for him to be starting and getting reps, just because the Giants are kind of going through a tough stretch right now, and there's not really any options. So I think right now it'd be perfect if he wasn't injured, but I don't think the existence of Josh Ezeudu should stop the Giants from going and upgrading that position if they do have an opportunity to do so, whether it's in the draft, whether it's in free agency, whether it's via trade. I don't think now they can say, Josh Ezeudu is our future. I think that if they find a better option, let Ezeudu continue to develop. Maybe he takes on a different role. Maybe he becomes a kind of a swing, left guard, left tackle, can plug in those roles. It's always a great thing to have really good backups. That's how good teams survive, right? That's how great teams survive. They have very talented backups. So Ezeudu, if he ends up backup and a really good one at that, that's not a bad problem to have if we can find better players to start for us and give our quarterback and receivers and everybody else better opportunities. Center, Nick Gates, I trust him. I think he can do it. I think he can bounce back to have a really good career. But again, if there's better options and we have an opportunity to get a better option, I'm not hesitating, guys. I'm not like this offensive line has been so bad for so long. I'm not letting any of these guys, aside from Evan Neal and Andrew Thomas, stop us from upgrading those units, right? And like I said, love Nick Gates. I think Ezeudu is a good player, but are we really not going to upgrade those spots because we have faith in them? We've seen enough. We know what these guys are. They're good. They're not excellent players. They're young in terms of Ezeudu. We just don't know what he is just yet. That's not stopping me from upgrading these units. Glowinski, do not trust him either. I don't think there's a lot of money tied in. I think next year, probably the majority of his cap hit kicks in. So maybe he starts next year, and then they move on after that. So we'll kind of see how the Giants go about this. But Anthony, what are your thoughts on the interior offensive line? Personally, I'm not letting anything stop me, if I'm the Giants, from upgrading those positions, those players next year. Because at this point in time, you're seeing what they're doing on the field, and it's simply just not enough.
No, it's not enough. I think the interior of the offensive line is absolutely the biggest weakness on the New York Giants roster right now, and it's going to be priority number one for the Giants this offseason. It has to be. If it's not, they're going to blunder this offseason in my eyes, because you cannot win games with that offensive line right now. Like, Andrew Thomas is great. He's struggling in recent weeks. I think that's a product of having so much garbage piled to the right of him, honestly. He has no one good to help him block on the interior, and they just put a lot of pressure on Andrew Thomas to be the only decent offensive lineman out there. Evan Neal really struggling. He struggled really badly against the Eagles. He played pretty well against Washington the week prior, but overall this season, it's been an up and down year for him. But that's kind of what you expect with a rookie offensive tackle. Give him some time, get him some better players around him, and I think that he can also be a really solid player. I kind of look at the Giants offensive line as this right now. I kind of made this analogy last week, but it's like the buns are really nice, but all of the meat inside is rotten, right? You've got two bookend offensive tackles on each side of the line, but everything in between is just disgusting and needs to be rid out of there. You got to get rid of those players, and you have to rebuild that offensive line. What I really hope that the Giants do, they've got a couple foundational pieces on this line with their left tackle, who's young and all-pro level, with a right tackle who's got that kind of potential in Evan Neal. What I want to see the Giants do is kind of build what Dallas did for all those great years where they had Tony Romo at quarterback, and it didn't matter who they had at running back because their offensive line was just so dominant, with Tyron Smith in his prime, Zach Martin, Travis Frederick. They had so many talented players on that offensive line, but it was all homegrown talent. They invested a lot of early picks in the draft into that offensive line, whether that be a first-round pick in Zach Martin, a second-round pick in some of these other guys. I know La'el Collins was undrafted, I think, because he fell out of the draft. They signed him, made him a priority. They built a dominant offensive line for years, and they still have a great offensive line because they continue to build through the draft. They've never given up on that philosophy, and that's what the Giants need to do. They need to start building this offensive line through the draft. They've started it. They got their offensive tackles in the draft, but what about your left guard? What about your right guard? What about your center? And as you mentioned, Alex, I like Joshua Zito. I like the potential that he has, but that doesn't stop me from going out there and drafting someone in the first round to be a dominant all-pro left guard. That's what you go ahead and do. If that's sitting in the Giants' lap when they're picking in the first round, you go ahead and you take that surefire talent on the interior because that's a difference maker right there. You talk about Saquon Barkley not having enough holes. The running game is not built well. Okay, we'll get some better offensive linemen for him, and it will be built well. You can have Saquon Barkley dominate if he has good blockers in front of him, but throughout the entirety of his career, we've never seen him have a decent offensive line blocking for him. And same thing with Daniel Jones. We always talk about Daniel Jones being good, Daniel Jones being bad. We really still don't even know what Daniel Jones is because the team has not been able to open up the offense because they don't have blockers in front of him. So we'll never know at this point unless they really shirk things up this offseason and let Daniel Jones continue as the quarterback next year. But right now, the number one weakness on this team by far is the interior offensive line. The quarterbacks yesterday, not only Daniel Jones, but Tyrod Taylor went in the game. They were sacked 7 times. The Giants offensive line let up 7 sacks in yesterday's matchup. That is disgusting and completely unacceptable. And again, that's not going to get fixed unless the Giants go in this offseason and invest a ton of capital, free agency money, whatever the case might be. Just invest in that offensive line and rebuild it from the ground up. Keep the tackles, everything in the middle. You got to replace Feliciano. I don't need him. Glowinski, don't need him. Even though they're tied into a contract with him, you don't need to keep him. You can let go of him. He's just not that good. Nicky Gates, great backup. Don't think he should be starting. Love everything that he's done for the team. Love his leadership. Think it's an amazing story that he's playing football again. But let's be honest, he should not be on the field on a consistent basis right now. The Giants need to go out there, make massive improvements to that position group if they want to win games and sustain this winning time and make the playoffs year after year.
Absolutely. So looking at the number 2 ranked in our weakest list of Giants units, personally, I think I have to go with the linebacker core. I know receiver is another one that we're going to discuss in a moment, but linebackers right now we have Jalen Smith, you have Tate Crowder, you got Micah McFadden. I think Darian Beavers would be starting right now if it wasn't for his ACL injury, but Tate Crowder obviously is probably on his way out after kind of the public outlash. And I find it interesting that, Rodarius Williams was a hell match again after kind of publicly saying, I want to be, playing whatever. But Tate Crowder played yesterday. So it's just kind of strange to me how this is kind of going on and how this is working out. But ultimately, I kind of feel like Jalen Smith is a good backup. He actually shows some pretty good athleticism, some speed. I like him as a really cheap veteran option on the back end. Need him as a reserve, but he's not a guy that I want to start every single week. Micah McFadden, solid young rookie, 5th round pick out of Indiana. I like him. I think he has some solid tools, but again, he's not ready to be starting at the NFL level. If you're looking at what the Giants should be doing, I think bringing in maybe a veteran next year and drafting a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round is probably where I'm looking for a linebacker to help this unit. But Anthony, when you're looking at the linebacker core, are you thinking it's probably the 2nd weakest? I probably say it's one of the weakest in the league, that linebackers unit. Definitely one of the weakest in the league, but it has to be addressed ultimately, whether it's be, trade, free agency, or, just, I guess, drafting someone. But at the player, the personnel we have right now, how important is it that we address that spot?
I mean, it's very important. I wouldn't say it's more important than interior offensive line. I might even say that the wide receiver position is more of a weakness. I think that the Giants really need an X factor there, but that linebacker position is also super important. The Giants have been shunning that position for like 3 regimes in a row. They have not made any serious improvements there or tried to find any splash acquisition in that position for like a decade. That position has sucked for the Giants year in and year out, the linebacker position, that is. So you're looking at it right now, it's kind of torn to shreds. There were some injuries. They were hoping Blake Martinez would pan out. He didn't. He never recovered from that ACL injury. Now he's retired. Tate Crowder, just not good. Micah McFadden playing well. Now he's banged up. And they had Darian Beavers, who they drafted in the later rounds of this year's draft. He tore his ACL in the preseason. Looked like he was going to be a bona fide starter for the team. No shot after a torn ACL. So it's like the Giants tried to make some improvements this offseason, but for one reason or another, it all just fell apart. They got really unlucky, and that's happened to the Giants a lot this year. A slew of injuries, week in, week out, so many injuries, all the time, and it's really damned the Giants' season in the second half of the year. So when you're looking at that linebacker position, there's definitely room for improvement, a lot of room for improvement. But I got to say, I got to give credit to Joe Shane. He tried to improve the position. He tried to make some moves. It just didn't pan out because of injuries, and that really sucks. So going into this offseason, I'd like to see the Giants probably invest in a solid veteran in free agency to fit Wink Martindale's scheme and be a starting linebacker, an off-ball linebacker in the Giants' defense. But I'd also like to see them continue to build with some of these young guys through the draft and see if they can, catch a gem in the middle rounds, basically. Micah McFadden. I think there's a chance he develops into a gem for the team, but that remains to be seen. He's a young rookie who's going out there. He doesn't have any solid players in front of him. It's kind of just the Micah McFadden show at linebacker right now, which is not what you want. You want to ease these young guys into the lineup, and he's being thrown to the wolves and just going out there and trying to make a name for himself. And I think that's a lot to put on a rookie fifth-round pick like Micah McFadden. And even if Darian Beavers was healthy, they would have been asking way too much of him as well. So I think that the Giants are just at a point where they were left with a very difficult situation, Joe Shane was, where he didn't have a lot of cap space. The draft capital was good, but not enough. And this is a rebuild at the end of the day. The Giants won a lot of games this year, but this is a rebuild year. They're building something really solid that's demonstrated by the amount of wins that they got this year, but they need to make a lot of improvements, and the linebacker position is no different.
Yep, that's a fact. And now we look over at the receiver position, I think is probably third on the list. Now, we have been talking about the wide receiver market in free agency for a couple of days now. The wide receiver market in free agency is extremely thin. That's a main Giants have been such a big kind of link with Odell Beckham Jr. because it's not about a reunion. It's not about the playoffs. It's about having a good receiver who's going to be healthy next year instead of having to rely on a free agency market that's going to be extremely thin. Now, guys, you're looking at like Darius Slayton as like one of the better options on the market. It is thin as it gets. So the alternatives, you go and sign OBJ now for a multi-year deal and have him for next season, maybe 2024. Or you look at the draft, Jackson Smith and Jiba at Ohio State. There's a couple of guys who really fit the bill. And of course, you got Wan'Dale Robinson. He has a torn ACL, so he probably won't even be ready until maybe training camp, probably early in the season. Maybe he'll be back. But right now, I'm kind of sitting here thinking that we're going to have to draft another receiver probably in the first or second round. If I was leaning toward the draft in terms of allocating assets, I'd say the first round's probably where we're looking at right now. This team needs more help there. Like, end of the day, they need significant amount of help at receiver. So, we've talked about interior offensive line. We talked about linebacker. We've talked about receiver. They're going to have to address all these positions, but you don't have multiple first round picks. You got one first round pick, right? So like, what do you do here? Which position really gets the biggest asset? What gets the biggest piece of draft capital? Interesting. I guess you probably just go best player available at whatever position comes along, and at whatever spot we land at, which seems to be probably in the 20s range right now, unless we lose the rest of our games, and maybe we sneak into the maybe, I don't know, the 15 to 20 range. So it should be interesting, Anthony. But when you're looking at the receiver spot, I know it's important to address this spot, but how do you go about skirting around free agency to add more pieces? Because right now you can't rely on free agency to be that primary method of injecting talent into it.
Yeah, you can't rely on free agency to find you a wide receiver. The only one who's really worth signing is going to be Odell Beckham Jr. And I know that the Giants had him in for an interview. There's been a whole lot of chatter about OBJ in recent weeks and, his free agency tour that he just went on, the fact that he's probably not even going to play in the regular season, a really weird situation there. But when you look ahead to March and you see who's going to be on the open market at the receiver position, OBJ is the most prominent name and the most effective player at that position. So the Giants are going to need to get creative, whether that be making a splash trade. Now, that's something that we've seen as well, right? We saw the Buffalo Bills with Joe Shane, Brian Dable. They had something special in Josh Allen, but they knew that in order to unlock the next level of Josh Allen, they had to go out there and trade for an all-pro caliber wide receiver. They did that with Stephon Diggs, and all of a sudden, Josh Allen was an MVP candidate. It wouldn't be shocking to me to see the Giants go out there and make some sort of a splash trade like that. You even see with Derek Carr how much better he's been this year, now that he has Devontae Adams to throw to. Sometimes it really makes that big of a difference when a quarterback has a superstar receiver to throw the ball to. And even Kirk Cousins with Justin Jefferson, he's been a much better player ever since they drafted him. So whether the Giants go ahead in the first round and try and find the next Justin Jefferson, or they go into free agency and try and sign someone solid or make a big splash trade and find the next Stephon Diggs, they got to make a move because this receiving core is just putrid. I mean, listen, credit to the guys who have stepped up and made the plays. Isaiah Hodgins is one of them. Darius Slayton is one of them. But all of these guys are basically practice squad players. They're fringe roster players on the bubble, and the Giants just have to make it work, which is the last thing you want to see. Injuries play a big part in that. Of course, Sterling Shepard being down for the year, a really talented young player, and Wan'Dale Robinson being done for the year. The Giants had some moves that they made. They had some players on this roster that could have made this a decent receiving core, but it's not enough when you get all these injuries and you just don't have the depth on the roster. So going into the offseason, I think the wide receiver is going to be a top priority for the Giants. Of course, interior offensive line is number one to me, but number two to me is wide receiver, because I think that we have a lot of conversations about Daniel Jones trying to unlock that next level of his game. Is he a franchise quarterback? I don't think you truly know the answer to that until you get him a franchise receiver, or at least someone really solid to go out there day in and day out and make some receptions. We thought we were getting that with Kenny Golladay. We were wrong. He is completely phoned it in. He got his paycheck and he basically disappeared into the void. So we can go out there this offseason, try and find someone reliable for Daniel Jones and see what he has. And another thing that I'll say is a wide receiver is going to make Saquon Barkley and the running game better as well. Defenses aren't going to stack the box anticipating the run when you've got a guy on the outside who can beat you over the top and basically kill your defense single-handedly. When you have that elite receiver outside, it opens things up in the running game. You see that over in Cincinnati. Joe Mixon had a phenomenal year last year because Jamar Chase was on the outside threatening opposing corners and opposing safeties every single play. So the Giants need to make that a priority. Go out there, get an elite, very talented wide receiver. That will open things up for your quarterback and for your running back. It'll be completely different offense once they have a receiver in there. It'll be dynamic. It'll be game-changing. It's a major point of emphasis for the Giants going into this offseason.
Yeah, and it has to be. And looking at the last weakness on this, it's going to be cornerback. I mean, I really like Adoree Jackson. He's been tremendous for us up to this point. Obviously injured because the coaching staff decided he was going to return kicks, which was the dumbest idea. Like, talk about the stupidest idea I've ever seen from a coaching staff. That was it. Like, every single person that reacted to that said the same thing. He is going to get hurt. He's going to miss time, and we're going to end up being screwed because of it. And what do you know? Yeah, we're freaking screwed because we don't have Adoree Jackson. I mean, we had Nick McLeod on AJ Brown yesterday, bro. It doesn't get worse than that. You know, we had a practice squad guy on one of the best receivers in the game. And, you know, Jackson was really, really good up to the point where he was injured. So it's unfortunate. But looking into the future, still got Adoree Jackson for 2023. His cap number is about 19.5 million. So it's a pretty significant number there. If they were to cut him, they would save $9 million. But I just don't see how you're able to, if you're able to cut him right now. I mean, you know, at this point in time, the Giants don't have enough capital to actually replace him. You know what I mean? Like, Adoree Jackson is probably one of, if not our best secondary piece, you know, probably neck and neck with Xavier McKinney right now. I don't know how you replace Adoree Jackson. You really can't, because as you mentioned, the Giants do need down the road. I don't think you need to cut him either. I think I'd rather cut Leonard Williams than Adoree Jackson personally. Simply because we have good defensive line pieces, and you got Dexter Lawrence still, you got Kayvon Thibodeau, you have Azeez Ojulari, who was tremendous yesterday, but you don't have a guy that can replace Adoree Jackson. And as we know, Aaron Robinson suffered a partially torn ACL and fully torn MCL, so tough to combat those things. But, you know, another position, how do you address this? Cordell Flott is not a CB1. I don't think he's ever going to be a CB1. He's probably more so going to be a reserve guy. Has not really shown that level of growth we need to see. Of course, you know, he's a rookie, so he could take big steps forward. He gets a little older, gets a little bit more size to his frame. I'm not going to rule any of that out, but, you know, probably CB2 is his ceiling. So we'll see. But, you know, what are your thoughts on the cornerback position, and how do you address that? Maybe you look at the free agent market to address cornerback, and you utilize your draft to go out and address linebacker and maybe get an interior offensive lineman in the third round or so.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting, and I think we'll be able to determine that more once we know where the Giants are picking in the draft, and once we see, you know, who's on the open market in free agency. You never know who gets cut or who's on the trading block, but of course, the cornerback position is one that the Giants need to shore up, and I think that Adoree Jackson is a very competent CB1, a very solid player. The injury is super unfortunate, and it has completely shredded the defense. Without Adoree Jackson in the lineup, it's a completely different defense from what we saw in the beginning weeks of the season. That was a major impact, losing Adoree Jackson for the Giants. But going into this offseason, I think that they do need to add another veteran to the mix, another really solid veteran cornerback who can pretty much lock down a receiver whenever he needs to, alongside Adoree Jackson, because I think Jackson is a very good CB1, but who is that CB2 for the Giants? And now that Adoree Jackson is out of the lineup, It's just been a scramble to find guys who can even play. And I think that's your main weakness in that position group is the lack of depth. The Giants do have a lot of young guys that they want to develop, but I don't know if they're developing them the right way by just throwing them to the wolves. Kind of similar to players that we talked about earlier with Micah McFadden and them. These young guys that the Giants draft are not meant to play immediately. They're meant to sit, wait, get better at the sport, and then go out there and play once they're ready. And these guys are just not ready to play. Guys like Zion Gilbert, I think Rodarius Williams might be, but clearly his mentality and his complaint on social media kind of damned him there. Darnay Holmes has been getting better year by year, but still, I don't want him starting on the outside game in and game out. I think that he's better working out of the slot. You're just seeing a major lack of depth at this position. So whether the Giants go out there in the free agency and actually get a starting outside cornerback, or if they sign a couple of veterans who can be solid depth for the team, one of the two solutions needs to happen. And they do need to continue to invest capital in the draft and later in the rounds on some of these young guys, because eventually you'll find some solid contributors. You will get some guys later in the draft who can develop into something decent, but you don't want those late round guys starting games. You want to get some veterans who can start those games for you. And I think that's going to be the main priority for the Giants in the secondary this offseason. Go out there, get some veteran corners who can start for you on the outside, and you don't have to rely on these young, inexperienced players to go out there, because cornerback is very much a position of experience. If you have experience out there, you can read a receiver better. You can read a quarterback better. But when you're an inexperienced cornerback, a rookie stepping into the NFL and getting your first action against a talented Pro Bowl level wide receiver, it's basically game over before it even starts, because you don't have the experience that you need to match up against a guy like that unless you're an otherworldly talent like Sauce Gardner. And not every cornerback is Sauce Gardner. In fact, Sauce Gardner is Sauce Gardner, and no one else is on that level right now in terms of young cornerbacks. So the Giants need to make it a point of emphasis to find those veterans, find those experienced guys who've gone up against that top level competition before. And that's pretty much how you can fix that cornerback group in my eyes. Just get some guys who've been there before, won some games in the NFL, and faced some good competition. And I think you'll see a much more improved position group if they go through that formula next season.
Absolutely. And look, we talked about how thin the wide receiver free agency class was. The cornerback free agency class is extremely deep. There is a lot. I mean, you're talking Marcus Peters, Bradley Roby, James Bradbury, Jonathan Jones, Anthony Brown, who's having a tremendous year for Dallas, Emmanuel Mosley, Cameron Sutton, Patrick Peterson, a nice veteran piece there. Eli Apple, jokes, never keep that guy out of here. Kyle Fuller, PJ Williams, Artie Barry Murphy, Rocky Sin, Sean Murphy Bunting, Trey Flowers. There's a ton of even Greedy Williams from Cleveland, probably a cheaper option. Bryce Callahan. I mean, they had got a lot of free agents in 2023. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Obviously, the Giants are going to have their pick. They'll probably get a couple. Maybe they get two guys and they retain Adoree Jackson. There's a lot of options, right? You can attack the cornerback position in free agency and use your draft capital on linebacker, receiver, and on interior offensive line. You could even go, we'll do another video looking at the free agents and for each individual position, but you could probably look at like interior offensive line, free agency, probably look, because, the positions that normally take a little bit more time to develop, rookie receivers can have instant impacts. Look like Devonta Smith, Michael Pittman. There are guys that come in, step in, and have even Garrett Wilson for the Jets. I'd say you probably look interior offensive line and cornerback for free agency and go linebacker and wide receiver in the draft. So, I about it, but we'll talk about this more in the future, guys. I'd love your perspectives and opinions below on this episode, the things we've discussed. Hope you guys have a tremendous rest of your day. Like and subscribe as always, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.